All right, Man Hour Nation, welcome back to the show. I am very honored right now to be able to have a guest on with me at this time. Retired play-by-play man, 40 plus years in the business. If you ask me, he's one of the best to ever do it. His name is Bob Picozzi. Bob, how are we doing?
I'm doing great, Brandon. It's snowing here today, but I've lived in New England since 1973, so I'm almost getting used to it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm here in Chicago, and I spent like 15 years up in Vermont, so I know all about cold and snow and all that other good stuff. One of the big reasons why I can't wait to hopefully move southeast at some point in my life.
So you decided to escape the snow and move to tropical Chicago. I got it.
Yeah, exactly. I grew up in Chicago and then went to Marine Corps, and after the Marine Corps, I spent about 15 years up in Vermont. So,
Mhm.
um, I've always been a cold weather guy, unfortunately, because I really do hate the snow. As even though I've never moved out of it, but it's definitely not for me. I'm a warm weather guy. I'm a baseball guy, so I like the summer, Bob.
Yeah, so do I.
All right, so how's retirement treating you? Do you miss calling games?
Well, yeah, I do. I'll always miss calling games, and you find. I'm sure all retired play-by-play guys go through the same thing. You watch a game and you imagine what you would say at this moment, particularly late in a basketball game where it's close and there are a lot of timeouts. You wondered what you would say, and so I will always miss calling games. But I also enjoy retirement very much. I love the idea that when I get up in the morning, I don't have to be somewhere. And
Right.
and there are times where I will go for days and days without getting in the car going anywhere, especially in the last year during the pandemic. I've only been out of the state of Connecticut once since the pandemic started. Um, but I enjoy retirement very much. I enjoyed my career, and I'm also enjoying my retirement very much.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Us guys here at the Man Hour, myself, Buckheister, and Wyatt, we all are doing this full time and trying to make something of it. But we also, all three of us, also have full time jobs, and Wyatt also goes to school. He's still hasn't graduated high school yet, so
Mhm.
uh, we know all about. Can't wait until we're in your shoes, where we can just stay home and not have to worry about anything. But we're a long ways away from that anyway. So let me ask, let's go into calling games.
Mhm.
It's something that's always been a dream of mine. Like I really want to get into calling baseball. And I know Wyatt, he works a lot with the Indiana High School Association, and he calls a lot of their games. He just called the state championship games down in southern Indiana. So we're really interested in the life of being a broadcaster itself. What is it like to become a broadcaster, for one, like the journey to it, and then how do you really get into being, calling it at on the highest levels?
Well, it helps if that's what you always wanted to do, and it's what I always wanted to be. I always wanted to be a Major League Baseball player, but then when I realized that was not going to happen, then I decided to shift gears. And then I decided I want to become a play-by-play announcer. And I was 10 years old when I made that decision. And I never outgrew the dream. And everything that I did after that was with the idea of chasing that dream. Probably the most important decision I made was the decision to attend Seton Hall University because of the reputation of its campus radio station, WSOU. So I went there and was heavily involved in the radio station for 4 years. I got a chance to call 60 games while I was a student. So I had a lot of practical on-air experience, albeit at the college level by the time I graduated. And then it's just a case of working your way up. I didn't do any play-by-play in my first job out of college, but that was only 3.5 months long. And then I got a better job. And then I started doing high school basketball and high school football play-by-play. And then my third job, I did Yale basketball and then Fairfield University basketball. And then I kind of made a kind of a sideways step and became a local TV sports anchor for 19 years. And I had very few play-by-play opportunities during those 19 years. It was definitely a good career move at that point. But by the time I left there, the play-by-play opportunities had increased so much, especially on TV. And then that's when I started working for ESPN and started doing games for them, and also other. I did some games for Fox. I did the UConn women's basketball local TV package, and so I mean, I love doing it. And it's I guess to answer your question, um, the more games you do, the more opportunity people who hire have to hear you, and hopefully they like what they hear. And just like anything else with repetition, you ought to get better. If you don't, there's something wrong.
Yeah.
And so I think one of my great regrets is that I didn't keep track of how many games I did. I'm sure it was over 1,000, but I wish I knew the exact number. But I love them all, and whenever I watch a game, particularly college basketball, since the overwhelming majority of games I did were college basketball, it always reminds me of games I did in that arena. Oh, I remember when I did this, and they played, and that kind of thing. And I have a pretty good memory, and all of those memories are very warm ones.
Yeah, so that is what Wyatt is on the trajectory of. So Wyatt started out, really early. His sophomore year of high school, starts calling games, and he knows that that's what he wants to do. Me, on the other hand, I've just always been a sports junkie, and after high school, I went into the Marine Corps, and then after that, I became a carpenter, and I always had this, this little dream of wanting to just do sports all the time, talk sports like I am now. But I'm gonna be 40 next month, Bob. So I'm a little late to the game. I've got some, a whole lot of growing to do. This man hour gig has been absolutely phenomenal. We are doing great things with it. Um, but in order to get there and call games at the highest level, you probably really do have to start early, don't you?
Well, it helps, but again, I made the so I told you I was in local TV for 19 years,
Yep.
and then I left local TV because they didn't renew my contract, so they kind of they forced my hand. It was really the first and fortunately only time my career was ever at a crossroads, and I was 46 years old, and I had a lot of radio play-by-play experience. I had done, I don't know, maybe 20, 25 games on TV during those 19 years at the local TV level. But I was taking a gamble at that point. I decided I didn't want to continue doing that.
Right.
Didn't want to continue being a local TV sports anchor, and I wanted to get back to my first love, which was play-by-play. So I picked the brains of at least 50 people to ask them whether they thought that was a realistic goal, given my age. And the feeling was unanimous. I mean, I've known Bill Raftery forever. Bill was hired as the coach at Seton Hall when I was a junior, and I did the games for the student radio station. So I've known him since then and have stayed in touch with him since then. And so I remember, out of all the advice I got, his probably resonated the most. And he said, with your experience and your talent and your contacts, and all three of those are equally important, said you absolutely can do it. And he said you'll probably find that it'll take a while to grow, but the more people who hear your work, the more people will want to hire you. And that's exactly the way it worked out. So again, I made that jump. It's not that I didn't have any play-by-play experience, but I was 46 years old when I made that jump into doing TV play-by-play. In hindsight, I wish I did it much earlier, because I think I would have had a chance to, first of all, I would have had a chance to enjoy so many more years of doing play-by-play. And I probably, there's no doubt in my mind, I would have a chance to ascend a little bit higher on the ladder. The best way to start is to do it at the local high school level, and to understand that you're not going to make much money.
Right.
And then you just listen to your tapes. And also, it's a good idea to ask someone to critique your tapes. And when I was a senior in college, so you're bemoaning the fact you're about to turn 40. I'm amused. On June 4th, I'll turn 70. And I'm a Jersey guy. So if you're my age and you wanted to become a play-by-play announcer, and you're from New Jersey or New York or Connecticut, there's a real good chance your hero, your idol, was Marv Albert. And he was mine. I was always a Rangers fan. I was never a Knicks fan, but I used to listen to Marv all the time when he was only on radio. And my college roommate senior year said, "Why don't you send Marv a tape and see if he'll critique it?" I said, "What, are you out of your mind? Why would he do that?" He says, "What do you have to lose? The cost of a stamp, and and you don't get your tape back." So I did it, and about 10 days later, the tape came back in the mail with a handwritten note that said, "I listened to your tape. If you want me to go over it with you, call me at this number at such and such a time." And I did, and he spent about 20 minutes on the phone with me, and it was great.
Oh, wow.
And I can remember to this day some of the things he told me. And so, as you can imagine, if he did that for me, he had no idea who I was. He must have done it for everyone. So
Right.
I decided at that point, if ever anyone thinks that I have anything to say that might be of some value to them, I will always do it. And that's been my mantra ever since then. And people all the time, they're asking me if I'll watch or listen to their tapes, and I do, and I give them some critique. And they and from doing it for all these years, you get pretty good at recognizing things, and where they can prove this is good, this is not so good, and that kind of thing. But the only way you get better is to listen to your tapes and to hear what you're doing and to hear things. Probably the greatest mistake you make is you tend to be repetitious, saying the same thing over and over again, whereas you could use a different word or words to describe the same thing and not be so repetitive. But the only way you're going to find that out is by watching and listening to your work.
That's great information. For me, that's very very encouraging to hear, because I really thought that I was starting late in the game, but to hear that there's still a shot to do things at a high level, it's very encouraging.
Well, let me just point this out, Brandon, and you being in Chicago now, you'll appreciate this. One of the people who reached out to me to ask them to watch their tape, and in this case, it was listen to the tape. It was a radio, and it was when he was in college, and then he sent me another one when he was out in the business after a year or two, and he was grateful for the advice I gave him. It's a guy named Jason Benetti.
Okay, yeah.
He was a senior at Syracuse, and it's funny what a small world it is. I referenced my college roommate John Hugelmeyers from Towson, Maryland, and John's nephew was a student at Syracuse and was a very good friend of Jason. And one time over a long weekend, or maybe it was spring break, Jason came to Maryland to visit Scott, John's nephew, and John met him and he asked him what he's studying. When he found out what he was studying, he says, "Well, you know who you ought to talk to? You ought to talk to my college roommate, so and so." So Jason did, and I listened to it. And then a couple of years later, I'm doing the Big East women's basketball tournament, the semifinals at the Hartford Civic Center, and DePaul is playing UConn in one of the games. And I'm at the morning shoot around for DePaul, and after the shoot around, you meet with the coaches. And I've known Doug Bruno forever. And Doug said, "Bob, do you mind if our radio play-by-play guy sits in on this conversation?" And I said, "No, not at all." And he says, "Bob, this is Jason Benetti." And I didn't even know that Jason was doing the games. So, and then Jason and I wound up working on the same team at ESPN. So, yeah, I'm always willing to do that. And I strongly recommend people who are just starting out in the business that they try to do the same thing, that they get someone in the business to listen to their work and offer a critique.
That's great. And Jason Benetti is a fine play-by-play guy for the Chicago White Sox. I am a Chicago Cubs fan, and they actually just took a guy from our play-by-play booth, which is Len Casper, over to their side to do radio, and he's leaving TV to do radio. And a lot of a lot of the Cubs fans were upset. Obviously, he's going to the South Side. We love listening to Len Casper call games. But his preference has always been radio. Like, he's always wanted to do radio, and he felt like this was the perfect time, the perfect opportunity for him to jump over to the radio side and be able to call games. What's for you? What is the difference, or is there a preference between TV and radio, and what would you prefer to do?
Well, I did a ton of radio at the beginning of my career, and then I did all TV in the last 20 years, with one exception. I did one game for ESPN Radio, and I was terrible because I hadn't done a radio game in years, and I knew the transition would be tough, and it was 10 times tougher than I thought it would be. There's no question it requires much more ability and skill to do it on radio. It's not even close. When you're making the transition from radio to TV, the first thing, most important thing you have to learn to do is to cut down on what you say, by tenfold, because you would drive people crazy if you talked as much in doing a game on TV as you did on radio. But the transition going from TV to radio, you have to remember that you have to keep talking. So this was I was doing a Florida Georgia football game, which was a really good assignment for ESPN Radio, and it's just tough to break a 20-year habit. And as they break the huddle, you have to lay out the offense, and how many wide receivers there are, and how many tight ends, and where they are, and is the quarterback under center, or is he in the shotgun, et cetera, and just remind you. I'm sure if I had done another game, I would have been that much better. But I can understand Len feeling that way. Now, unfortunately, and it's not the least bit fair, you are compensated much greater doing games on TV than you are in radio. So it's an interesting move that Len made, but I admire him for doing that if that's his first love. And also, baseball is a great radio sport.
Yes.
Baseball is a much greater radio sport than any, because of the pace of play. Baseball is my favorite sport. I love nothing more than to sit on the beach, because being from New Jersey, I love the beach, and listening to a baseball game.
Yeah, people call me crazy because if I'm driving around and I can't watch the game on TV, and now I'm a Cubs fan, but I'm a baseball guy. Like I'll watch 1,000 games a year, and not even that's a little bit light for me as 1,000 games a year, because I watch as much baseball as I can. But I really love listening to the games on the radio. One of my, favorite color commentators came from sports radio, which was on the Cubs side, which was Ron Santo. The way and how enthusiastic he was about the Cubs, I just love listening to it. I love listening to the game. There were times where I would turn down the TV broadcast while I'm watching it on TV and turn up the radio broadcast just so I could listen to Ron Santo, on the call. And that is it's something about when you love the game, you can actually sit there and listen to it on the radio, and a lot of people don't understand that. So I actually love the fact that you just said that, because it's one of my great loves as well.
Well, I think you have to love baseball to understand it, and I love baseball, and I'm sure you sound like you would understand it. To try to explain to someone who doesn't like baseball why you love it, they'll never understand it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So I have Sirius in my car, and I mean that's the greatest invention since ice cream,
Right.
because you can listen to. What I'll do is I'll listen to all the games. At each commercial break, I'll try another broadcast, because in addition, to enjoy listening to the game, I like to listen to all the different announcers.
Correct. Yeah, that's the same way that I am. I love watching. So I'll watch Cubs games, and sometimes I'll flip over if I'm out of market. I'll flip over to a Cubs game and flip over to the visitors broadcast just to hear what their broadcasters are like. Right. So yeah, no, it's something that I do love. One thing about baseball, and I'm curious to hear your take about it, and we've gotten into this subject a lot here lately on our show, is the steroid era, and how the Baseball Writers of Association of America are dealing with the steroid era, like not voting anybody in this year. So I'm curious to hear your take on the steroid era, because my take is that baseball made a ton of money off of the steroid era, and when their hand got caught in the cookie jar, so to speak, they kind of threw the players under the bus, and now the players are really the ones paying the price for it. I'm curious to hear what your take is on that.
Well, I certainly understand why anyone, not the least of which are the Hall of Famers themselves,
Mm-hmm.
who feel the way they do about people who use PEDs. and how it was not a level playing field. It's such a complicated issue because if you follow the career, Barry Bonds, I don't believe ever tested positive, but I think you're not going to find many people who don't believe that he used
Right.
PEDs. Roger Clemens was in the Mitchell report, and certainly you're not going to find many people who didn't believe he used them. And Alex Rodriguez obviously did test positive, but I think if you follow the game closely, you have to understand they were great players before we think they started using. I mean, I
Right.
don't believe Roger Clemens used until after he left Boston. Well, he's a pretty good pitcher for the Red Sox. He won 3 Cy Young Awards and an MVP award there.
Right.
But then, so that's the part that makes it difficult.
Right.
How do you navigate that? Were Clemens and Bonds and A-Rod Hall of Fame players, before they started using PEDs? The answer could very well be yes.
Right.
And if the answer is yes, I think I would vote for them. But that's why when people ask me who's the greatest at this and that, I'm going to give you 2 different answers. One that completely disregards PEDs and one that disqualifies people because of PEDs.
Right.
If you ask me who the greatest left fielder was in baseball history, if you disregard the PEDs, it was Barry Bonds.
Correct.
But if you want to disqualify him because we think that he used PEDs, it would be Ted Williams. And, I would do that. I think Clemens is the greatest right-handed pitcher in baseball history if you discount the PEDs when you look at all of his accomplishments. So I don't know. I think I probably side with the Bob Costas school of thought that, I'd probably vote for them, but there should be a notation on their plaque that is applicable and that is fact-based about whatever their involvement was with PEDs.
Yeah, and I'm a big. It's funny. The ball that sits over here on my shoulder is actually a Barry Bonds autographed baseball, and I'm a big fan of Barry Bonds. I think Barry Bonds is the greatest player to ever step on the field. You look at the numbers, you look at the things that he did throughout his career. I'm on that bandwagon that Barry Bonds is the greatest of all time. But then you look at like I was talking about, Baseball Writers of America not voting for these guys. It's almost like they decide who they like because there's a overwhelming majority that believe that next year a guy like David Ortiz is going to get in, and he has a positive test on his record, but he is very well liked among the media, and Barry Bonds was not for whatever reason. So I feel like, and then you look at guys like Ty Cobb who got in and their background and stuff that you hear about them, and it's almost like they're drawing a moral compass line, and you tend to wonder, where does that moral compass line stop? But
Well, I mean, the Pete Rose is in his own separate category because that has been the law of the land since the
right,
Black Sox scandal.
yeah,
It is a rule, and the sign is on the clubhouse door everywhere. So he violated that rule, and not only does everyone know what the rule is, but they know what the penalty is that comes with the rule.
agreed,
And there's a reason why, since the Black Sox scandal, there's only been really one person that's been involved and linked with betting, right? And it's
yeah,
right because it's a deterrent, and the
right,
deterrent has worked. Ty Cobb, I'm sure what you're referring to is a pretty good indication through history that Ty Cobb was a racist.
yep,
Well, being a racist doesn't directly affect. Look, there's no one on earth I despise more than racists, but that doesn't affect what you did on the field. Using
right,
steroids does. So I'm not so sure I agree with you with the popularity or the unpopularity. I don't know who would be. I don't know who would be a good case. The problem with Andy Pettitte was very popular with the media and very popular with the fans. The problem is his Hall of Fame credentials are borderline anyway. Personally, I would vote for him because he's got 18 postseason wins, which is
right,
the most ever, and he played on 5 championship teams. And also, he is. I'm pretty sure about this. I think there are only 2 pitchers in baseball history who finished 100 games over 500 and who are eligible for the Hall of Fame who are not yet in the Hall of Fame. And they
right,
are Roger Clemens, and we know why, and the other one's Andy Pettitte. So and Pettit hasn't received any significant support so far. I'm not suggesting that Pettit's resume is anywhere near as great as Clemens' resume, but I don't think you're going to find anyone who says, "Well, I'm not voting for Pettit because I don't like him," because Pettit was universally liked, and the way he handled it, he fessed up. He said, "Yes, I did it. This is why I did it, to rehab from an injury." But I don't know what the answer to that is. I can certainly appreciate how the hardline Hall of Famers, and most of them are hardliners, don't want to have anything to do with people with a PED history getting into their hallowed halls.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned Pete Rose, because that's one of the arguments I always get is, well, if you're going to let these guys in, then Pete Rose definitely needs to be in. Well, what changed? I used to be on that camp too. I used to be like, well, what Pete Rose did on the field, I mean, it's unquestionable. But the gambling on the game, what changed my mind was actually a conversation with one of his former teammates, and he said, look, he's never getting in, and he shouldn't be in because he gambled on the game, and it's the one rule that we all know, and he broke it. So that's kind of what changed my mind, was that view of it. And I think the steroids era is just a different topic, and it's a debate that is going to go on forever, I'm sure. But I guess we'll see. Time will tell whether or not these guys get in. I believe that they should be in. Others believe that they shouldn't be in, and ultimately, I don't get a vote. So that's the one thing that remains to be the same, is I don't get a vote, so I don't get to say who gets in. So before I let you go here, I do want to get back into your times as a play-by-play guy. I got a couple of fun questions I'd like to ask you. First and foremost, what is your favorite memory calling a game?
Well, I don't think that there's a definitive answer to that question. So I'll answer it two different ways. I had done, as I said, games on local radio at the beginning of my career. And then when I went to work for ESPN, I did games on a regional basis. Back then, the Big East Network, the games were produced by ESPN Regional Television in Charlotte, and they were just that. They were regionally televised. They would always be in the markets of the two participating teams, and they would frequently be on in other Big East markets where the team in that market didn't have a game that night. They might be on as many as 40 different TV stations, but they weren't nationally televised. And the first time that I did a game on national TV was an NCAA. I also did a lot of women's college basketball. Was an NCAA women's basketball tournament game, a second round game at the University of Texas in March of 2002. And as I was walking into the Irwin Arena in Austin that night, I was well aware of the fact that this was the first time I was going to do a game that was going to be on nationally. It doesn't change the way you prepare, nor change the way you call the game. And I never once thought about it once I was on the air, but it kind of hit me as I walked into the arena. But probably the most memorable game I called, I did the America East Men's Basketball Championship game for a number of years. And it was a Stony Brook at Albany game. And the America East is one of these leagues where they play the championship game on the home floor of the higher seed of the two finalists. And the atmosphere is off the charts. Right. Because it's obviously a one-bid league. You either win the conference championship game and go to the NCAA tournament, or you go home. There's never going to be an America East team that's going to get an at-large berth in the NCAA tournament. So Albany had a player from Australia named Peter Hooley. And Peter, between the time he signed his letter of intent to go to Albany and the time he actually left for school, his mom was diagnosed with cancer. So at first, he didn't want to go. But she convinced him to go. Don't worry about it. I'll be fine. I'll get the treatments. Your dad's here. Your sister's here to take care of me. I'll be fine. So he went off to school. And then I think it was his senior year. I'm not 100% sure about that. His mom started her condition took a turn for the worse. And his dad said, I think you better come see her. So he took a leave of absence and he went home, and he essentially sat vigil in her hospital room for 14 days, and then she passed away. And then he took a little more time off, and this is during the basketball season. And then he decided it's time to go back to school. And his dad and sister went with him because they felt he would need that support system. And they didn't stay very long because they saw that he had another family, the Albany basketball team and the coaches and the student body who all knew about it. And he had a tremendous support system there. So they went back home. So now fast forward, it's the conference championship game, and his team is losing by 2 points, and he hits a three-pointer from the top of the circle with 3 seconds left to win the conference championship game and send them to the NCAA tournament. And the students stormed the floor, and someone had an Australian flag and draped it around him. And I did the game with Tim Welsh, the former Iona and Providence college coach. And Tim interviewed Peter on the floor, and he's got the Australian flag around his shoulder. And the shot wasn't clean. It was a rim rattler and went in. And he said, I think my mom, helped with a little body English there to send it in. And it was just, so it was the whole scene. I think we did a pretty good job of setting up the storyline early in the broadcast and then having to revisit the storyline when he made the game-winning shot. So for those reasons, that was memorable. It's the America East is always the first championship game that's played on that Saturday before Selection Sunday. Yep. And there are about 15 conference championship games that are played that day. And so ESPN has games wall to wall, and they, at halftime and between games, they're going to the studio, and they must have played that highlight, 20 times over the course of the day.
Yeah.
And then the next day, they had Peter on live and everything. So that was an unforgettable moment for me.
Yeah, that's one of those moments that every time you see it gives you chills, or hear it gives you chills. Those are always my favorite sports moments. For me, it's always going to be the last out of 2016 World Series. Like I still get tears when I watch it, just
sure.
because But those stories are always my favorite. Now, the last question I want to ask you before you get out of here might be the toughest question I've asked you since we've been on. Who was the color analyst that you had the most fun with during your career?
Well, that's not tough at all. I mean, first of all, I had fun with a lot of them, but the one that I had the most fun with was Bill Raftery.
Okay.
And it has everything to do with the fact that I've known him forever. And it was interesting. Of course, Bill was at the very top of the food chain. As you know, he does the Final Four for CBS. So he always did games for Big East, for ESPN and CBS. And then when the Big East fell apart and rechristened as a new league, Fox got the TV rights. So since he had been so closely identified with the Big East throughout the history of the league, first as a coach at Seton Hall and then as a broadcaster, he decided he wanted to continue doing Big East games. So he left ESPN, and he now does games for CBS and Fox. And for whatever reason, in his final year at ESPN, they assigned him to work with me for 3 games. And it was a blast. The games were a blast. The night before was a blast. And, I was an ESPN radio sports center anchor for 18 years. And first 14 years was during the show Mike and Mike. So one time Bill was a guest on Mike and Mike, and the format changed over the years, but for a while they would go to a commercial break, and out of the break they would have my sports center, and then Golick and Greenberg would come back on. So Bill was the guest of the next segment. So my sports center aired, and then they came on and they welcomed in Bill Raftery, and Bill had been on hold. He was on the phone, and on hold you hear programming. So he heard me in the sports center. And so they welcomed him in, and he said it was nice to hear my old friend Bob Picozzi. And this is like at 6:20 in the morning or 6:40 in the morning. And he said when Bobby was at Seton Hall, the only time he was ever awake at this hour was when he was just getting in from the night before. And so, which first of all is only partially true. And talk about the pot calling the kettle black when it comes to that. But it was so much fun doing games with Bill. He's one of the greatest guys I've ever met. I still stay in touch with him all the time. He's been great to me throughout my career. He's helped me in many, many ways. And so getting a chance to do a couple games with him was just an absolute blast.
That's awesome. That is awesome. All right. Well, Bob, thank you for joining us here on the show today. I will talk with you here in a few seconds, just off camera. But I appreciate everything you have. It's been an absolute honor, been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining the Man Hour.
It was my pleasure, man.